It started with a glance that lasted 3 seconds too long, in a corporate lobby where careers were built on discretion and destroyed by impulse. Chan Woo would lose his job, his dignity, and every assumption he'd made about the distance between his world and hers. But first, Erina Scholes would catch him staring at her body with an expression somewhere between reverence and recklessness, and everything that seemed impossible would crack open just enough to let the light in. 6 months earlier, Chan Woo had walked into Meridian Global Holdings with his intern badge clipped to a blazer he'd bought on credit and a resume that sparkled with academic achievements but offered nothing in the way of connections. He was 26, which made him older than most interns, a consequence of mandatory military service and a delayed start. His English was excellent, his financial modeling skills sharper, but in a firm where legacy admissions and Ivy League pedigrees opened doors before competence ever mattered, he was invisible. He'd accepted that. What he hadn't prepared for was learning that Erina Scholes worked in the same building. The revelation came during orientation, when someone mentioned her name in passing. Chan had frozen mid-step, his coffee nearly sloshing over the rim of his cup. He knew that name. He'd studied her case in his graduate economics seminar, written a paper analyzing her acquisition strategy during the 2019 market correction. She'd turned a failing logistics company into a vertical integration powerhouse, and she'd done it without venture capital or a single compromise to her vision. She was ruthless when necessary, generous when strategic, and at 38, she was the only black woman on the board of a firm that still looked like a country club from the 1950s. Chan had admired her from an academic distance, the way one admires a historical figure or a particularly elegant proof. It had not occurred to him that admiration could curdle into something more dangerous. But then he'd seen her photograph in the annual report, a glossy, professionally lit portrait that nevertheless failed to contain the sheer force of her presence. She wore a navy suit and pearl earrings, her hair pulled back in a way that emphasized the architecture of her face. She wasn't smiling. She didn't need to. The camera had captured something more compelling than warmth, certainty. Chan had stared at that photograph longer than was reasonable. Then he'd searched for more. There were interviews in Forbes and Bloomberg, panel discussions on YouTube, where her voice was lower and more melodic than he'd expected, charity galas where she wore gowns that made his breath catch. In one image, she stood beside a Rolls-Royce Phantom, her hand resting lightly on the door, her expression unreadable behind oversized sunglasses. She looked untouchable. She looked like someone who'd never had to wonder if she belonged anywhere. Chan had grown up in Busan, in a neighborhood where success meant stable employment and a modest apartment. His parents ran a small grocery store, the kind where they knew every customer by name and extended credit when times were hard. They'd sacrificed everything to send him abroad for graduate school, believing education was the only inheritance that mattered. He'd worked delivery jobs and tutored undergraduates to cover what scholarships didn't, and he'd done it all with the understanding that he was building towards something better. But better had always been abstract, a job, a salary, maybe, eventually, a family. It had never been her. Somewhere in those late nights scrolling through articles and interviews, admiration had shifted into something he didn't have a name for. He started imagining conversations they might have, debates about market inefficiencies or the ethics of shareholder capitalism. He pictured her laughing at something he said, her guard dropping just enough to reveal the person beneath the armor. It was a fantasy, and he knew it. But fantasies were safe. They didn't require courage or consequence. Then he told Anthony. Anthony Vince was the only other person in the intern cohort who treated Chan like a peer instead of a curiosity. He was from Connecticut, white, effortlessly charming in the way people were when they'd never had to think about whether they'd be taken seriously. They'd been assigned to the same project during the first week, and Anthony had looked at Chan's financial model, whistled low, and said, "You're going to make the rest of us look like idiots." They'd gotten drinks after that, then more drinks. Anthony had a girlfriend he complained about in the affectionate way people did when they knew the relationship was temporary but comfortable. Chan had shared almost nothing about his personal life, until one night, 3 beers in, Anthony had asked if Chan was seeing anyone. "No," Chan had said. "There's someone I think about, but it's not realistic." "Why not?" "She's out of my league, way out." Anthony had grinned. Dude, you're a catch. Smart, good-looking, you've got that whole mysterious foreign thing going on. Who is she? Chan had hesitated, then said, Erina Scholes. Anthony had choked on his beer. Wait, Erina Scholes? The board member Erina Scholes? I know. Holy shit, you're serious. I know it's insane. Anthony had stared at him, then started laughing. Not cruelly, but with the kind of disbelief that came from hearing something so absurd, it circled back to impressive. Man, you don't aim small, do you? It's not like I'm going to do anything about it. Why not? Because she's a billionaire and I'm an intern. Because she probably doesn't even know I exist. Because you're scared. Chan had looked away. Wouldn't you be? Anthony had leaned back, considering. Honestly? Yeah. But also, what's the worst that could happen? She says no. You feel like an idiot for a week, life goes on. You're already assuming it's impossible, so you've got nothing to lose. I could lose my job. For what, having a crush? Come on, this isn't high school. But it wasn't just a crush, and Chan knew it. It was something more consuming, more irrational. He'd started timing his coffee breaks to coincide with the moment she might pass through the lobby. He'd memorized her schedule based on the executive calendar that occasionally flashed on shared monitors. He knew she preferred the east elevator, that she arrived at 7:45 every Tuesday and Thursday, that she wore her hair down more often than up. He knew he was being pathetic. He also couldn't stop. The first time he saw her in person, he was standing near the security desk, pretending to read something on his phone. She'd walked in flanked by 2 assistants, moving with the kind of purpose that made everyone else in the lobby feel like they were standing still. She wore a charcoal suit that fit her like architecture, and her heels struck the marble floor with a rhythm that felt almost musical. Chan had looked up, and the world had narrowed to just her. She was taller than he'd expected, easily 5'9" without the heels. Her skin was a deep, warm brown that caught the light differently depending on the angle, and her hair was pulled back in a low bun that emphasized the length of her neck. But it was her body that had undone him. She was curvy in a way the photographs hadn't fully conveyed, her hips and waist creating a silhouette that felt almost gravitational. She moved through space like someone who knew exactly how much room she took up, and refused to apologize for it. Chan had stared. Not subtly, not briefly. He'd stared like a man who'd forgotten where he was and what the consequences might be. And then she'd looked directly at him. Their eyes had met for maybe 2 seconds, but it felt longer. Her expression hadn't changed, but something in her gaze sharpened, a flicker of awareness that made his stomach drop. Then she'd looked away and kept walking, disappearing into the elevator with her entourage. Chan had stood there, heart hammering, convinced he'd just ended his career. He'd told Anthony about it that night. You think she noticed? Anthony had asked, sprawled on Chan's couch with a beer. She looked right at me. That doesn't mean she cared. Important people get stared at all the time. She's probably used to it. I wasn't just staring. I was... Chan had stopped, unable to articulate the specific flavor of his stupidity. You were checking her out. Anthony had supplied helpfully, yes. Okay, so worst case, she thinks you're just another guy who finds her attractive. That's not exactly a scandal. She could report me to HR. For what? Looking at her? Dude, relax. If every guy who found her hot got fired, the company would have about 6 employees left. Chan had wanted to believe him, but the moment had lodged itself in his brain, replaying at odd hours. The way her eyes had landed on him, sharp and assessing. The way his body had reacted, heat flooding his face and neck. The way he'd felt, for just a second, like he'd been seen. He started avoiding the lobby during her arrival times. It was easier to worship from a distance, safer to keep his fantasies where they belonged. But the universe, or fate, or whatever governed the random cruelties of proximity, had other plans. 3 weeks later, Chan was leaving the building at 6:30. Exhausted from a day of spreadsheets and condescension from senior analysts who treated interns like furniture. He was thinking about dinner, about whether he had the energy to cook or if he'd default to instant ramen again, when he saw her. She was standing near the valet station, checking her phone while a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom idled at the curb. The evening light caught her profile, turning her skin almost golden. She wore a cream blouse tucked into high-waisted trousers, and her hair was down, falling in soft waves past her shoulders. Chan stopped walking. He couldn't help it. She was maybe 20 feet away, close enough that he could see the delicate gold bracelet on her wrist, the way her lips pursed slightly as she read whatever was on her screen. And then, as if sensing his gaze, she looked up. This time there was no crowd to disappear into, no elevator to save him. They were standing in the open, the space between them charged with something Chan didn't have words for. Her eyes traveled over him slowly, starting at his face and moving down, not lascivious but appraising, the way someone might evaluate a piece of art they weren't sure was worth the price. When her gaze returned to his face, one eyebrow lifted slightly, not quite a question but an acknowledgement. She knew he'd been staring. Again, Chan felt his face burn. He should look away, should apologize, should do literally anything other than stand there like an idiot. But his body wouldn't cooperate. He was trapped in her attention, pinned by the weight of her regard. Erina's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Amusement? Curiosity? He couldn't tell. Then she turned away, slipping her phone into her purse and moving toward the Rolls-Royce. That was when Chan's brain short-circuited. He didn't plan it, didn't think it through. One moment he was standing there, watching her walk away, and the next he was moving, his legs carrying him forward before his rational mind could stop him. "Ms. Scholes," he called out. She paused, one hand on the car door, and turned back to face him. Her driver, a large man in a dark suit, shifted his weight, suddenly alert. Chan closed the distance between them, stopping at what he hoped was a respectful distance. Up close, she was even more devastating. He could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the precise application of her lipstick, the way her chest rose and fell with each breath. "Yes?" Her voice was lower than he'd expected, with a slight rasp that made his pulse spike. He swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. "I'm sorry for staring. Both times. That was inappropriate. Was it?" She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "And yet, you're doing it again." He was. God help him, he was. "I know this is completely out of line," he said, the words tumbling out faster now, desperate. "And I know you don't know who I am. I'm an intern. Chan Woo. I worked. I don't know if I still work here after this, but You just what?" He took a breath. This was it. The end of everything, or the beginning of something impossible. "I just needed to tell you that you're the most extraordinary person I've ever seen. Not just because you're beautiful, which you are, but because of everything you've accomplished, everything you represent. I've studied your career. I wrote my graduate thesis on your acquisition strategy. You're brilliant and fearless, and I know I have no right to say any of this, but I couldn't let you drive away without knowing that someone sees you. Really sees you. Not just as a name on a balance sheet or a face in a boardroom, but as..." He stopped, realizing how insane he sounded. Erina was watching him with an expression he couldn't read, her lips slightly parted. "I'm sorry," he said again, quieter now. "I'll go." He started to turn away, but her voice stopped him. "Chan Woo." He looked back. She was still watching him, her dark eyes unreadable. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out a business card, and held it out to him. He took it, his fingers brushing hers for half a second. The card was thick, expensive stock, with her name embossed in silver and a single phone number beneath it. "That's my personal line," she said. "Not many people have it." Chan stared at the card, then at her. "I don't understand." "You will." She turned back to her car, then paused. "Or you won't. Either way, I'll know what kind of man you are." She slid into the Rolls-Royce, and the driver closed the door behind her. Chan stood there, card in hand, as the car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the evening traffic. He looked down at the number again, his hands shaking slightly. Then he pulled out his phone and called Anthony. "Bro, are you playing with me right now?" Anthony's voice crackled through the phone, loud enough that Chan had to pull it away from his ear. "I'm not. I swear I'm not. Erina Scholes gave you her personal number. The Erina Scholes. After you basically confessed your undying devotion to her in a parking lot." "I didn't say undying devotion." "You wrote your thesis on her acquisition strategy, man. That's the academic equivalent of getting her name tattooed on your chest." There was a pause, then Anthony laughed, the sound edged with disbelief. "Holy shit, what are you going to do?" Chan was walking aimlessly now, the card still clutched in his hand like a talisman. I don't know. What am I supposed to do? Call her, obviously. When? Now? God, no. Not now. That's desperate. Give it a day. Maybe two. Show her you have some self-control. What if she changes her mind? Then she changes her mind. But I don't think she will. You know why? Oh, why? Because she could have just walked away. She could have had security escort you out. She could have done literally anything other than give you her number. She's interested, dude. She might not know why yet, but she is. Chan wanted to believe that. He also wanted to believe he hadn't just hallucinated the entire interaction. He looked at the card again, at the clean lines of her name, the single number beneath it. No email. No assistance line, just her. What do I even say to her? The truth. You're good at that, apparently. Just don't be weird. I ran after her in a parking lot and told her I wrote a thesis about her. I think weird is already on the table. Anthony laughed again. Yeah, okay, fair. But that was honest weird. That's different from trying too hard weird. Just text her, keep it simple. Thank her for the card, tell her you'd like to talk when she has time. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Chan almost laughed. Overthinking was the only thing he was good at. They talked for another 20 minutes, Anthony cycling through increasingly outlandish theories about what Erina's motivations might be, before Chan finally hung up and stared at his phone. He opened a new message, typed in the number from the card, and stared at the blank screen. What did you say to someone like her? Someone who operated on a different plane of existence, who made decisions that affected thousands of lives, who could buy and sell him 100 times over without noticing the dent in her bank account. He started typing, then deleted it. Started again. Deleted again. Finally, he settled on something simple. Ms. Scholes, this is Chan Wu. Thank you for giving me your number. I'd like to talk with you if you're willing. I promise to be less awkward than I was this evening. He read it 3 times, then hit send before he could talk himself out of it. The message showed as delivered. Then, after a moment as read, Chan's heart lurched. She was looking at it, right now. She was reading his words, forming an opinion, deciding whether he was worth her time. The 3 dots appeared, indicating she was typing. Then they disappeared. Chan stared at his phone for another 5 minutes, but nothing came. No response. No acknowledgement, just silence. He went home, ate ramen he barely tasted, and lay awake until 3 in the morning replaying every moment of their interaction. The way she'd looked at him, the card in her hand, the phrase you will or you won't, like she was setting a test he didn't know how to study for. The next day at work was torture. Chan couldn't focus on anything, his mind constantly drifting back to his phone, checking it every few minutes even though he knew he hadn't missed a notification. By lunch, Anthony had cornered him in the break room. Anything? Chan shook his head. Give it time. She's probably busy. She read it last night. She just didn't respond. Anthony frowned. Maybe she's thinking about what to say. Or maybe she realized giving me her number was a mistake. Stop spiraling. You literally just texted her yesterday. Rich people operate on a different timeline. She's probably in meetings all day. Chan wanted to believe that. He also wanted to believe that if she'd really been interested, she would have responded immediately. But he didn't say that out loud. Instead, he nodded and tried to focus on the presentation he was supposed to be preparing for his supervisor. The second day was worse. Still no response. Chan checked the message thread obsessively, confirming it had been delivered, that it showed as read, that he hadn't somehow imagined the entire thing. He considered sending a follow-up, then decided that would make him look desperate. By the 3rd day, he'd accepted that it was over. Whatever impulse had driven her to give him her number, she'd reconsidered. He was just another face in a lobby, another man who'd stared too long and misread kindness for interest. He was eating lunch alone, picking at a sandwich he had no appetite for, when his phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a calendar invitation. Chan nearly dropped his phone. The invitation was from an address he didn't recognize, but the subject line made his stomach flip. Dinner. Friday, 8 p.m. Rosewood VP section. There was no message attached, no explanation, just the time and location and a note at the bottom that said, confirmation code and details to follow. Chan sat there, staring at the screen, trying to process what this meant. She hadn't responded to his text, but she'd sent him a dinner invitation to the Rosewood, which even Chan knew was one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. The kind of place where reservations took months and the VIP section required connections that no amount of money could guarantee. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number, a confirmation code, a name to give at the door. And then at the bottom, a second message that made Chan's breath catch. You'll need something appropriate to wear. The attached card has been authorized for a single purchase. Use it. There was a photo attached. A black credit card with his name embossed on it. Chan's hands were shaking now. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. People like Erina Scholes didn't do things like this for people like him. And yet here it was, undeniable and impossible in equal measure. He called Anthony immediately. Dude, I'm in a meeting. She sent me a dinner invitation. And a credit card. There was a long pause. I'm coming to your place after work. Don't do anything until I get there. Anthony showed up at 6 with Thai food and a bottle of wine that Chan suspected was more expensive than his monthly rent. They spread everything out on Chan's tiny kitchen table, and Anthony made him walk through the entire sequence of events again, from the parking lot to the calendar invitation. Okay, Anthony said finally, leaning back in his chair. So she's interested, like very interested, or she's testing me. Same thing. The point is, she's not ignoring you. She's engaging. Strategically maybe, but engaging. Why didn't she just text me back? Because she's a billionaire and billionaires don't do anything the normal way. She's setting the terms, the location, the timing, even the dress code. It's a power move, but it's also an invitation. She wants to see how you handle it. Chan rubbed his face. I don't know how to handle it. I've never been to a place like the Rosewood. I don't know what to wear, what to say, how to act. That's why she gave you the card. She's leveling the playing field. She doesn't want you showing up in your intern clothes feeling like you don't belong. She wants you confident, or at least confident enough. What if I screw it up? Then you screw it up, but you won't. You've already impressed her once. Just be yourself. Myself ran after her in a parking lot like a stalker. Yourself also wrote a graduate thesis on her business strategy and had the balls to tell her she was extraordinary. That's what got her attention. Don't lose that now. Chan spent Thursday evening shopping, which was its own form of torture. The card worked exactly as Erina had said it would, but using it felt surreal, like he was play-acting at being someone he wasn't. He settled on a charcoal suit that fit better than anything he'd ever owned, a white shirt, and shoes that cost more than his first month's rent. The sales associate had been helpful in a way that suggested the card came with some kind of note or flag in the system. And Chan had left the store feeling both more prepared and more out of his depth. Friday arrived with agonizing slowness. Chan couldn't eat breakfast, barely made it through work, and spent the afternoon staring at his computer screen without absorbing a single word. At 5, he gave up and went home to shower and change. By 7:30, he was standing outside the Rosewood, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The building was all glass and warm light, the kind of place that looked like it existed in a different tax bracket than the rest of the city. Chan gave his name to the host, who checked a tablet and nodded. Ms. Scholes is expecting you. Right this way. They led him through the main dining room, which was already buzzing with well-dressed patrons and soft jazz, and up a curved staircase to a second level Chan hadn't known existed. The VIP section was quieter, more intimate, with private booths separated by frosted glass panels. The host stopped at the last booth, pulled back a curtain, and gestured for Chan to enter. Erina was already there. She wore a burgundy dress with a neckline that made Chan forget how to breathe, her hair falling loose over one shoulder. She held a glass of wine, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp as she watched him approach. Chan Wu, she said, and the sound of his name in her voice made something tighten in his chest. Seat. He sat, his hands folded in his lap because he didn't trust himself to know what to do with them. Up close, in the soft light, she was even more devastating than he remembered. He could see the faint shimmer of her makeup, the curve of her collarbones, the way her lips curved just slightly at the corners. Thank you for coming, she said. Thank you for inviting me. And for the card. That was you didn't have to do that. I know, but I wanted you to feel comfortable. This place has a dress code, and I didn't want you worrying about whether you fit in. Do I? She took a sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving his. What do you think? He thought he was drowning. He thought she was the most beautiful, terrifying person he'd ever been this close to. He thought he had no idea what he was doing here, or why she'd invited him. But he'd walk through fire if it meant staying in her presence a little longer. I think I'm out of my depth, he said honestly. Good. That makes two of us. Chan blinked. You're out of your depth? Do you know how long it's been since someone looked at me the way you did? She set down her glass, her gaze steady. Not as a business asset, not as a connection to make or a deal to close. Just as a woman. I don't think that's true. He stopped, trying to find the right words. You're extraordinary. People must tell you that all the time. People tell me I'm smart, successful, intimidating, inspiring if they're feeling generous. But no one tells me I'm beautiful, not to my face, not without wanting something in return. I want something, Chan admitted. I just don't know if I'm allowed to say it. Say it anyway. He met her eyes, and for a moment he forgot about the power differential, the billion-dollar gap between their lives, the 1,000 reasons this was a terrible idea. All he could see was her, watching him with something that looked almost like hope. I want to know you. Not the version of you in Forbes or on the board, the real you. I want to hear you laugh. I want to know what you think about when you're alone. He stopped, his voice rougher than he intended. I want to be someone you think about when you can't sleep. Erina was very still. Then, slowly, she smiled. It wasn't the polite, professional smile from her photographs. It was something rawer, more genuine. You already are, she said quietly. Chan's breath caught. I don't understand. You didn't text me back for 3 days. I know. I was trying to talk myself out of this. She gestured between them. Do you have any idea what kind of scandal this could cause? You're an intern. I'm on the board. There are rules, Chan Wu, policies. And beyond that, there's the simple reality that anything between us would be dissected and judged by people who already think I don't belong where I am. So why did you invite me here? Because I'm tired of being careful. I've spent my entire career proving I deserve my seat at the table. I've made every right move, played every angle perfectly. And for what? To be alone in a penthouse, surrounded by people who admire my portfolio but couldn't care less about me as a person? She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but intense. You saw me, Chan. Really saw me. And I can't stop thinking about what that means. It means I couldn't help myself. You're impossible not to notice. Men notice me all the time. They notice what I can do for them, what connections I have, what doors I can open. You noticed me because you genuinely admire what I've built. That's rare. She paused, and for the first time she looked uncertain. That's something I didn't know I needed until you gave it to me. A server appeared then, breaking the moment, and they ordered food that Chan barely registered. But once they were alone again, Erina's expression shifted, becoming more serious. There's something you need to know, she said. I didn't just invite you here for dinner. I invited you here to tell you that you're being let go. Chan felt the words like a physical blow. What? Your internship is being terminated. Officially, it's a restructuring. Unofficially, it's me protecting both of us. I don't understand. If you stay at the company, anything that happens between us becomes a liability. HR would have to investigate. There would be questions about favoritism, about whether I used my position to influence your employment. It would ruin you professionally before you even got started. So I made a different choice. You got me fired. I got you free. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. I'm offering you something better than an internship, Chan. I'm offering you a chance to build something of your own. I want to invest in you. Not as a board member, not as a mentor. As someone who believes in your potential and wants to see you succeed on your own terms. Chan stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brilliant enough to write a thesis that impressed even me. I know you're brave enough to chase after a woman who terrifies most men. And I know you see me as more than just a name on a balance sheet. That's more than most investors can say about the people they back. And if I say yes, what happens then? Then we figure it out, together. No corporate hierarchy, no policies. Just two people trying to navigate something neither of us expected. And us? This? He gestured between them, his heart pounding. That depends on you. I'm not going to lie and say I know where this leads, but I know I want to find out. If you do too, then we take it one step at a time. Carefully, honestly, without hiding. Chan looked at her, at the vulnerability in her eyes despite her carefully controlled expression, at the way she held herself like someone who'd learned early that showing weakness was a liability. He thought about everything she was offering him, everything she was risking by even having this conversation. And he thought about the fact that he'd already crossed so many lines, broken so many rules, that turning back now would be the greatest cowardice of all. I want to know you too, he said finally. Not because of what you can do for me, not because of your money or your influence. Because when I look at you, I see someone who's been alone for too long. And I think maybe I could change that, if you let me. Erina's smile was small but genuine. Then let's start with dinner. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. Dinner stretched into 3 hours, conversation flowing between them with a natural ease that surprised them both. Erina talked about her early years building her first company, the investors who dismissed her, the quiet fury that had fueled her rise. Chan talked about Busan, about his parents' grocery store, about the weight of being the first in his family to pursue something beyond survival. They discovered they both hated networking events, both preferred silence to small talk, both had a weakness for old noir films. When the check came, Erina didn't let Chan see it. Next time, she said, and the promise of those words settled between them like a covenant. They left separately, her car pulling up first. But before she got in, she turned to him, her expression softer than he'd seen it. Chan Woo, she said. Thank you for tonight. For being exactly who you are. Thank you for seeing it. She smiled, then slipped into the Rolls-Royce and disappeared into the night. Chan stood there for a long moment, feeling like he'd just lived through something that would reshape the rest of his life. Then he called Anthony. How'd it go? I think I'm in love with her. Anthony laughed. Yeah, man, I know. The next 3 weeks unfolded in a careful dance. Erina didn't rush. She texted him thoughtfully, always late at night, messages that revealed pieces of herself she didn't show the world. She told him about the exhaustion of always being the only black woman in the room, about the subtle ways people questioned her competence, about the loneliness of success when it came at the cost of connection. Chan told her about the disorientation of living between cultures, about feeling Korean enough for Americans and too American for Koreans, about the pressure to justify his parents' sacrifices with achievements that never felt sufficient. They met twice more, always in private. Once at her penthouse where she cooked for him, a simple pasta dish she admitted she rarely made for anyone. Once at a gallery after hours, arranged through connections Chan didn't ask about, where they wandered through empty rooms talking about art and ambition, and all the things they'd given up to get where they were. Each time, the attraction between them grew sharper, more impossible to ignore. Chan noticed the way her gaze lingered on his hands, the way her breath caught slightly when he stood too close. She noticed the way his eyes tracked her movements, the way his voice dropped when they were alone, but neither pushed. They were both too aware of what they had to lose. Anthony was Chan's anchor through it all, the person who kept him grounded when everything felt surreal. They met for drinks regularly, Chan recounting his latest conversation with Erina, while Anthony listened with a mixture of fascination and concern. You know this is insane, right? Anthony said one night, nursing his beer. Not bedinsen. Just insane. I know. And you're okay with that? I don't think okay is the right word, but I can't walk away, not now. Then don't, just be careful. People like her, they live in a different world. Everything is bigger, more complicated. If this goes south, it's not going to be a normal breakup. It's going to be a whole thing. I know that too. Anthony studied him for a moment. You're different now. You know that? More confident. Less apologetic about taking up space. Is that good? Yeah, man. It's good. She's good for you. I just hope you're good for her too. Chan thought about that constantly. What did he offer someone like Erina? He had no money, no connections, no power to match hers. All he had was his attention, his honesty, his willingness to see her as something more than an empire wrapped in Prada. It wasn't until their fifth meeting, another late dinner at her penthouse, that everything shifted. They were sitting on her balcony, the city spread out below them like a carpet of lights. Erina had poured them each a glass of wine, and they'd been talking about Chan's business plans, the idea she was funding with a generosity that still made him dizzy. "I want to build something that connects small businesses across borders," he was saying. "Something that makes international trade accessible to people who aren't multinationals. My parents' store could never compete with chains because they didn't have the infrastructure. I want to change that." Erina was watching him with an expression he'd come to recognize as her thinking face, equal parts calculation and consideration. "That's ambitious. It's also a saturated market. You'd need a unique angle." "I know. I'm still figuring it out." "Good. Figure it out on your own terms. Don't let anyone, including me, tell you what your vision should be." "Is that what happened to you?" She looked away, her jaw tightening slightly. "For a while, I let investors push me towards safe choices, profitable but boring. It took me years to realize I could build what I wanted and still succeed. By the time I figured it out, I'd already lost a lot of time trying to please people who didn't care about me." "Is that why you're alone?" The question was blunt, maybe too blunt, but Chan had stopped censoring himself around her. Erina had made it clear she valued his honesty, even when it stung. She turned back to him, her expression unreadable. "Partly. Also because men like the idea of me more than the reality. I'm a trophy until I disagree with them, then I'm difficult. I'm fascinating until I outpace them, then I'm emasculating. I got tired of shrinking myself to make space for egos that couldn't handle my size." "I don't want you to shrink. I know. That's why I'm here with you instead of on another pointless date with another man who's intimidated by my tax bracket." Chan set down his wine glass. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why me?" "Really. Not the diplomatic answer. The real one." Erina was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. "Because when you look at me, you see me. Not the board member, not the billionaire. You see the woman who's tired and lonely and terrified of wasting her life on things that don't matter. You see the version of me I forgot existed. And when you told me I was extraordinary, you didn't mean my portfolio. You meant me." She met his eyes, and her vulnerability was almost painful to witness. "That's why you, Chan. Because you make me feel like a person again instead of a brand." Chan didn't think. He just moved, closing the space between them and kissing her. For a second, she froze. Then she kissed him back, her hand coming up to cup his face, her lips soft and warm and tasting faintly of wine. It wasn't desperate or frantic. It was careful, deliberate, both of them fully present in the moment. When they pulled apart, Erina's eyes were bright, her breath unsteady. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Chan admitted. "I know. I could tell. Why didn't you?" "Because once we cross that line, everything changes. We can't go back to just talking, just getting to know each other. It becomes something else, something more complicated." "Is that what you want? To keep it simple?" "No." She smiled, and it was the most unguarded expression he'd seen from her. "Simple is boring. I want complicated. I want messy. I want real. I just wanted to make sure you did too." "I do." They kissed again, longer this time, and Chan felt something in him settle, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying finally releasing. When they broke apart, Erina stood, offering him her hand. "Stay," she said. It wasn't a question. Chan took her hand and followed her inside. They didn't rush. Everything between them was unhurried, exploratory, both of them hyper-aware of the significance of what they were doing. They kissed on her couch, whispered confessions between touches, learned the geography of each other's bodies with a reverence that felt almost sacred. When they finally moved to her bedroom, it was with the understanding that this wasn't just physical. It was a promise, a commitment to the complicated, messy reality they'd chosen. Afterward, Chan lay beside her, his heart still racing, his mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. Erina was curled against him, her head on his chest, her breathing slowly evening out. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "I'm better than okay. Are you?" "Yeah." She tilted her head up to look at him. "I didn't expect this, any of this. You caught me off guard, Chan Woo. Good. You've been catching me off guard since the moment I saw you. She smiled, then grew serious. You know this is going to be hard, right? Not this us, but everything around us. People are going to have opinions. They're going to question your motives, my judgment. They're going to make assumptions. Let them. I don't care what people think. You will. Eventually. When it affects your business, your reputation. When people start whispering that you're only successful because of me, then I'll prove them wrong. I'll build something so undeniable they'll have to respect it on its own merits. And if they don't, then they don't. But I'm not going to let fear of judgment stop me from being with you. I've already crossed too many lines to turn back now. Erina kissed him again, soft and lingering. You're braver than you think. Or stupider. Maybe both. They fell asleep tangled together, and Chan woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and Erina already awake, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Morning, he mumbled, disoriented. Morning. Coffee, please. She disappeared into the kitchen, returning with 2 mugs and a smile that made his chest ache. They drank coffee in bed, talking about nothing and everything, and Chan thought this might be the most perfect morning of his life. It was Anthony who brought him back to reality later that week. So you're together now? Like officially? Yeah. And you're okay with the fact that everyone's going to assume you're a gold digger? Chan flinched. I don't care what people think. Bullshit. You care. Everyone cares. But the question is whether you care enough to walk away. No. I don't. Anthony nodded slowly. Good. Because she needs someone who won't bail when it gets hard. And it's going to get hard, man. People are going to be brutal. I know. Do you? Because it's one thing to say you don't care about judgment when it's hypothetical. It's another thing when your name is in gossip columns, when people are questioning whether you earned your success or slept your way into it. That's the reality you're signing up for. Chan set down his beer. You think I'm making a mistake? No. I think you're making a choice. A big one. And I want to make sure you're ready for what comes with it. I love her, Anthony. The words came out before Chan could stop them, and they hung in the air between them, undeniable and irrevocable. Anthony's expression softened. Then that's all that matters. Just don't lose yourself in her world, okay? Stay Chan. That's who she fell for. Chan carried those words with him over the next few months, as his relationship with Erina deepened and his business began to take shape. She introduced him to investors, opened doors he didn't know existed, but she also pushed him to stand on his own, to make decisions without her input, to build something that was entirely his. They were careful in public, never appearing together at events, never acknowledging the relationship that was slowly becoming the center of both their lives. But in private, they were inseparable. Erina taught him about the intricacies of international markets, the unwritten rules of high finance. Chan taught her how to slow down, how to find joy in small moments, how to laugh without calculating the cost. They fought, sometimes intensely, usually about his refusal to let her fund things he thought he should earn himself. She accused him of being too proud. He accused her of trying to fix everything with money. They always reconciled, both of them learning to navigate the vast differences in their backgrounds without letting those differences define them. 6 months in, Chan's business secured its first major contract, a deal he'd negotiated entirely on his own. When he told Erina, she didn't congratulate him with words. She just pulled him close and held him. And he felt her pride in the way her hands gripped his shoulders, in the way she breathed against his neck. "I knew you could do it," she whispered. "I had a good teacher." "No, you had drive. I just gave you space to use it." That night, at his tiny apartment instead of her penthouse, they celebrated with cheap wine and takeout, and Chan realized he'd never been happier. Not because of his success, but because he was sharing it with someone who understood what it meant, who saw the work behind it, who loved him for the journey, and not just the destination. A year after that first glance in the lobby, Chan moved into Erina's penthouse. It was a decision they'd both agonized over, aware of how it would look, what people would say. But they'd stopped pretending they could keep their relationship hidden forever, stopped caring about the opinions of people who didn't matter. When the news broke, it was exactly as brutal as Anthony had predicted. The comments online were vicious, the assumptions about Chan's motives ugly and unrelenting. But for every person who called him a gold digger, there was someone else who celebrated their relationship, who saw in it something hopeful and rare. Erina weathered it with the same grace she brought to hostile boardrooms. Chan learned to do the same, to let the noise wash over him without internalizing it, to hold tight to the truth of what they had built together. On a quiet Sunday morning 2 years after that first dinner, Chan woke to find Erina already awake, watching him with the same unreadable expression she'd worn that first morning. "What?" he asked, smiling. "I was just thinking about how you changed my life." "I didn't change anything. You were always extraordinary." "No, you reminded me that I could be extraordinary and still be loved. That I didn't have to choose between success and connection. That someone could see all of me and not run away." She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek. "You gave me my life back, Chan. The version of it I thought I'd lost forever." Chan caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You gave me mine too. I was just existing before you. Now I'm living." They stayed in bed longer than they should have, wrapped around each other, trading kisses and whispered promises. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, but inside, in the space they'd carved out together, everything was still. Later, they'd face the world again. They'd navigate the complexities of their public relationship, the endless scrutiny, the people who would never understand what they saw in each other. But for now, they had this. Each other. The complicated, messy, impossibly beautiful reality they'd built from a single moment of courage. Chan thought about that moment sometimes, about the decision to run after her instead of letting her drive away. About the way a single choice, made in 3 seconds of reckless bravery, had led him here. To her, to this life. To a future that felt limitless in its possibility. It hadn't been easy. It would never be easy. But as Erina smiled at him, her eyes bright with love and mischief, Chan knew with absolute certainty that it was worth it. Every stare, every whisper, every moment of doubt had led them here, to a Sunday morning where nothing existed except the two of them and the unspoken understanding that they'd chosen each other, over and over, and would keep choosing each other no matter what came next. Because some glances last 3 seconds too long, and some of them change everything.